Before I get into this, I want to ask, where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment below and let me know. And what time is it there? I love seeing where our Quiet Drama Stories community is tuning in from. Okay, let me tell you what happened to me. I was 23 years old the first time I understood that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had already decided I was disposable. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There was no screaming, no broken dishes, no door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. It was quieter than that. The quiet kind of cruelty is always the hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it, because from the outside, nothing looks wrong. From the outside, it just looks like a business decision. My father built Callaway Interiors from nothing. He started it out of our garage in Naperville, Illinois, when I was 4 years old, selling custom window treatments to neighbors and eventually to commercial clients across the Chicago suburbs. By the time I was in high school, it had grown into something real, a 30-person company with a showroom on Washington Street and contracts with hotel chains and corporate offices throughout the Midwest. My father was proud of it in the way that men of his generation are proud of things they built with their hands and their stubbornness. He talked about it at dinner every night. He brought me to the showroom on weekends. He taught me how to read a floor plan before I knew how to drive. I grew up believing Callaway Interiors was mine too. My mother passed away when I was 11, and after that it was just the three of us, my father, my older brother, and me. My brother is 8 years older than I am, which meant by the time I was starting high school, he was already working full-time at the company. He had my father's ear in a way I never quite did. They golfed together on Sunday mornings. They talked about sports and contracts and margins over beers I wasn't old enough to drink. I told myself the distance between us was just age. I told myself it would close once I graduated, once I proved myself, once I showed my father what I could actually do. I studied business at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I worked summers at the showroom doing everything from answering phones to helping stage installations. I learned the vendors, the pricing structures, the client relationships. I thought I was building something. I thought I was earning my place. My father had a stroke the spring of my senior year. It was mild, the doctors said, but it changed things. He moved slower. He tired more easily. He started talking about stepping back, about what the company would look like without him running point every day. 6 weeks after I graduated, my father called me into his office. My brother was already there, sitting in the chair across from the desk like he'd been there for a while. My father looked tired. He looked like a man who had already made a decision and was now just delivering the news. He told me he was restructuring the company. He said he was bringing in a formal management team and streamlining ownership. He slid a document across the desk. It outlined a buyout my father and brother would retain full equity, and I would receive a one-time payment of $40,000 in exchange for any future claim to ownership or profit sharing. He said it was fair. He said the company needed clear leadership and that running a business by committee never worked. He said he hoped I understood. I remember looking at my brother, waiting for him to say something. He looked at the window. $40,000. That was what 12 years of weekend showroom visits and summers on the warehouse floor and a business degree I'd chosen specifically to come home and contribute were worth to them. $40,000 and a handshake and a hope that I understood. I did not sign that document that day. I told my father I needed time to think. He said, "Of course, take the weekend." My brother walked me to my car without speaking, and when I got inside, I sat there for a long time before I could make myself drive away. I called my best friend from the parking lot and told her what happened. She told me to get a lawyer. I told her I didn't want to fight my own father in court. She told me sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you end up needing protection from. I didn't know yet how right she was. I signed the document 10 days later. I was 23. I had student loans. I had no income, and my father had made it very clear. Not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly that my position at the company was contingent on signing. I told myself $40,000 was enough to start over. I told myself I would build something of my own. I told myself a lot of things that first year. I moved into a studio apartment in Wicker Park and took a job as a junior sales coordinator at a mid-size commercial furniture company called Aldridge & Co. It wasn't glamorous. I was making cold calls and updating spreadsheets and learning a new industry from the ground floor, which in some ways I was grateful for, because the work kept me too busy to think about what I'd lost. But I cried in my car more times than I want to admit during those first months. I drove past the Callaway Interiors showroom once by accident and had to take the long way around for a year after that. That's when I met her. Her name was Renata Voss, and she was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately became the most interesting person in it. She was 61 when I first knew her, which I only found out later because she moved and spoke with an energy that made age seem like a concept she had simply declined to participate in. She had built her own commercial interiors firm Voss and Associates from a single office in River North in the 1990s, grown it into a regional powerhouse with clients in Chicago, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, and Detroit, and then pivoted the entire business model towards sustainable design before sustainable design was a selling point. She was the kind of businesswoman who made other businesswomen nervous, which meant she was exactly the kind of businesswoman I wanted to learn from. I met her at a trade show at McCormick Place. I was staffing our company's booth. She was walking the floor, and we ended up in a conversation about supply chain problems in the fabric industry that lasted 45 minutes and made both of us late for things we were supposed to be doing. She gave me her card at the end of it. Not the other way around. She gave me her card and said, "You think like someone who's been in rooms they weren't supposed to be in." I respect that. I didn't know what she meant at the time. I called the number on the card 3 days later anyway. She hired me as a senior accounts manager at Voss and Associates 8 months after that first meeting. The jump in title felt almost too fast, and I told her so. She said, "The title matches the capability. Catch up." It became a kind of motto between us. Working for her was different from anything I'd experienced before. She expected more than I thought I could give and then watched, almost with amusement, as I gave it. She included me in strategy meetings and client negotiations and decisions I had no business being in at my level. When I asked her once why she kept pulling me into rooms I wasn't technically senior enough to be in, she looked at me the way she sometimes did, like she was assessing something she already knew the answer to, and said, "Because you're going to need to know how these rooms work." I thought she meant for my career in general. I understand now she meant something much more specific. Over the next several years, I grew with the company. I became Director of Client Development, then VP of Operations. I was in my late 20s by then, living in a 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park, managing a team of 11 people, and traveling regularly to our regional offices. I had not spoken to my brother in 4 years. I spoke to my father occasionally, birthdays, holidays, conversations that were polite and surface level, and always left me feeling like I was talking to someone I used to know. He never asked about my work. I never offered. I heard through an old acquaintance that Callaway Interiors had restructured twice in 3 years and lost 2 major hotel contracts. I heard that my brother had brought in outside investors who now held a minority stake and were pushing for operational changes my father resisted. I told myself I felt nothing about this. I was mostly telling the truth. Renata was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition when I was 31. She told me herself, in her office, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the same directness she brought to every difficult conversation. She said the prognosis was uncertain, that she intended to keep working as long as she was able, and that she had already consulted with her attorneys about the future of the company. She said she was telling me first because I needed to know. I asked her what I could do. She said, "Keep doing your job well, that's always the answer." She meant it. And so I did. The next 2 years were hard in ways I don't have clean words for. Watching someone you admire navigate decline is its own kind of grief, especially when the person doing it refuses to let you treat them like they're diminished. Renata kept working. She kept making decisions. She kept being the most interesting person in every room, even as the rooms got smaller. I took on more responsibility quietly, without making it about her condition, because that was what she wanted, and I had learned by then that honoring what someone wants is its own form of love. She passed away on a Thursday morning in March, at home, with her sister beside her. I found out from a call from her attorney's office before the news had reached most of the staff. I sat with that for a long moment before I told anyone else. The memorial service was held at the Newberry Library in Chicago. which she had chosen herself and which was exactly right for her. I said she had taught me that capability and opportunity are only useful when someone believes in you enough to give them room to meet. I said she had given me that room when I hadn't known how much I needed it. I meant every word and could not get through the last sentence without my voice going thin. 3 weeks after the service, I was called into a meeting with the attorneys handling her estate. I assumed it was routine, transition planning, leadership structure, next steps for the company. I brought a notepad. I was not prepared for what they told me. Renata had left me 49% of Voss and Associates. The remaining equity was distributed among a small group of long-tenured employees in varying shares. The attorney explained that the structure had been arranged deliberately. The 49%, combined with the support of the employee shareholders, constituted effective controlling interest. In plain terms, I was now the majority decision-maker at a company with $12 million in annual revenue, offices in 4 cities, and 63 employees. I asked the attorney to repeat it. He did. I wrote it down on my notepad even though I didn't need to. I needed to do something with my hands. I thought about the document I had signed at 23, the $40,000 buyout. The quiet in my brother's face when I'd walked to my car. I thought about Renata handing me her card at McCormick Place and saying I thought like someone who'd been in rooms I wasn't supposed to be in. I thought about all the rooms she had walked me into on purpose, all the decisions she had let me sit beside, all the years she had spent teaching me how a company works from the inside of one rather than from the outside looking in. She had known, I think, for a long time. I just hadn't. I became president of Voss and Associates officially 6 weeks later. I had been functionally running operations for the better part of 2 years, so the transition was less disruptive than it might have been. The staff responded well, mostly. There were 2 senior partners who had expected more equity and made their feelings known through their attorneys, but Renata's estate structure was airtight and their challenges went nowhere. I focused on the work. I focused on the clients. I focused on honoring what she had built by making it better. By the end of my first full year as president, we had expanded into a 5th market, brought on 2 significant national accounts, and increased gross margin by 11%. I say this not to impress you, but because it matters to what happened next. It was my CFO who flagged it first. He came into my office on a Wednesday morning with a look on his face I had learned to recognize as his something has come across my desk face, and he set a document in front of me and waited. It was a letter of inquiry. Callaway Interiors, my father's company, my brother's company, the company I had signed away for $40,000 a decade earlier, was in acquisition discussions. They were looking for a buyer or a strategic partner to stabilize the business. They had lost 3 more major contracts. The outside investors were pushing for an exit. The letter, addressed to Voss and Associates as a regional competitor with demonstrated growth, was asking whether we had interest in a conversation. I read it twice. I set it down. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline for a moment that was longer than it probably appeared from the outside. Then I told my CFO to schedule the meeting. I want to be clear about why I said yes. It was not revenge. I have thought about this carefully because I think it matters to understand it correctly. I said yes because Voss and Associates was healthy and growing, and a strategic acquisition in our regional market made legitimate business sense. I said yes because Callaway's client relationships and vendor contracts, even in decline, had underlying value that a well-run operation could recover. I said yes because Renata had taught me to evaluate opportunity with clear eyes and not to let emotion in any direction make the decision for me. I also said yes because I am honest with myself about the fact that part of me needed to be in that room. The first meeting was at our offices, which I had chosen deliberately. My brother walked in with 2 attorneys and a financial advisor, and it took him a full 3 seconds after he saw me to recover his expression. I watched him process at the desk, the title on the glass door, the fact that I was sitting on the side of the table that asked questions instead of the side that answered them. He recovered. He extended his hand. He said it was good to see me. I said it was good to see him too. I meant neither version of that sentence. My father was not there. My brother explained that he had retired from day-to-day operations 2 years prior and that his health made travel difficult. I said I understood. I asked how he was doing. My brother said fine. We moved on. The due diligence process took 4 months. I had my team go through the Callaway financials in detail, and what they found confirmed what the surface numbers had suggested. The company was not broken beyond recovery, but it was close. The contracts they had lost were recoverable. The vendor relationships were strained but intact. The core business still had value. It was a company that had been mismanaged into a corner, which is a different and more fixable problem than one that had simply outlived its market. We made an offer. It was fair, meaning it reflected the actual current value of the company rather than what my brother hoped it would be worth. His attorneys pushed back. My attorneys held firm. After 6 weeks of negotiation, they accepted. The closing was scheduled at the offices of the acquiring firm's attorneys in the Loop, on the 43rd floor of a building on South Wacker Drive. I arrived early. I always arrive early. My brother came in with his team at 9 on the dot, and behind him, moving slowly and with a cane I had never seen him use before, was my father. I had not been in the same room as my father in 4 years. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not diminished, exactly, but compressed, like the space he took up in a room had quietly reduced itself. He saw me and stopped walking. His attorneys moved around him. He stayed still. I stood up. Old habit. Something my mother had instilled in me before she was gone. You stand when someone older enters the room. I stood up, even though part of me didn't want to, because some things are about who you are, not about who they are. My father sat down across from me. For a moment we simply looked at each other, and I thought about how strange it is that the people we are most shaped by, the ones who made us, for better and for worse, can become strangers across a conference table. He said my name, just my name, not hello, not how are you, just my name, with something in his voice I hadn't heard before that I chose to identify as recognition rather than regret, because regret was his to hold and I had put mine down a long time ago. I said, Dad. I hadn't called him that in 4 years either. It fit differently than I expected. Not wrong, just differently sized. We completed the closing. The documents were signed in the order the attorneys directed. When the final signature was done and the transaction was legally complete, one of my attorneys leaned over and quietly confirmed to me what I already knew but needed to hear aloud. Callaway Interiors was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Voss and Associates. I was its parent company's president. I controlled its future. My brother set his pen down and looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. I couldn't read everything in his expression, and I didn't try to read all of it. Some things in that look I recognized. I think he recognized some things in mine. My father spoke before anyone stood to leave. He looked at me from across the table and he said, "You built something." He said it simply, without preamble, in the voice he used when he was stating a fact rather than offering praise, which was the closest he could get to the same thing. You built something real. I sat with that for a second. Then I said, I had help. I was thinking of Renata when I said it. I was also thinking of the 23-year-old version of myself sitting in a parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, learning that not everyone who should love you will, and deciding to keep going anyway. She deserved some credit too. The meeting ended. Attorneys gathered papers. My CFO said something to one of the opposing advisors about transition timelines. My brother shook my hand and held it a beat longer than necessary. And whatever was in that extra second I decided to keep to myself and let mean whatever it needed to mean to both of us. My father paused beside me on his way out. He stood close enough that I could see the age in his face more clearly than across the table, the way time had redrawn the lines around his eyes and pulled at the corners of his mouth. He put his hand on my arm, just for a second. He didn't say anything else, and I didn't need him to. Some things don't have the right words, and after enough time, you stop waiting for them. I walked out of that building at 11:15 in the morning into a cold Chicago February that hit with the particular cruelty the city reserves for late winter. The kind of cold that reminds you, spring is still a theory. I stood on South Wacker for a moment and looked at the river. The Chicago River in February is not beautiful in any conventional sense. It's gray and businesslike, and it doesn't particularly care about you. I love it for exactly that reason. I thought about Renata. I thought about what she would have said if she'd been standing beside me. I think she would have said something practical, something about the integration timeline, or the vendor renegotiations, or the two Callaway clients who had the highest recovery potential. Then, maybe, if no one else was watching, she would have smiled. I think about the 23-year-old who sat in a parking lot and told herself $40,000 was enough to start over. She was right. Not because $40,000 is actually enough to start over. It is not, but because the starting over was always hers to do regardless of the number. And she did it. And here we are. I don't think about what I lost anymore. I think about what I built instead. I run Voss & Associates today out of our River North headquarters, 22 floors above the street. I am in the process of integrating the Callaway operations, retaining the staff who want to stay, recovering the vendor relationships that slipped, building back the client trust that eroded. It is not fast work, and it is not simple work, but I am comfortable with work that takes time. I have learned patience in the way that people learn it who have no other option, slowly, and only after trying everything else first. My father and I have spoken 3 times since the closing. The conversations are short and careful, and I think we are both figuring out what the shape of this is now. I don't know if it will become something. I am open to the possibility without requiring it. That feels, for now, like enough. My brother I have seen once, at a transition meeting I ran with the former Callaway management team. He was professional. He was clear about the operational knowledge he was willing to transfer. I was clear about my expectations for how the transition would proceed. We were, in some ways, better at talking to each other as professional counterparts than we had ever been as siblings. That says something, though I'm not certain yet what. So, that's the story. That's where I am. I want to ask you something before we wrap up, and I want you to actually think about it and leave me your answer in the comments, because I read every single one. When someone who was supposed to protect you fails a parent, a family member, someone you trusted, do you think forgiveness is something you owe them? Or is it something you choose, entirely on your own terms, for your own reasons? There's no right answer to that. I know because I've sat with it for 10 years, and I still turn it over sometimes on quiet mornings before the city wakes up. What I've landed on, for myself, is that I don't owe anyone my forgiveness, but I also don't want to carry what's not mine to carry. I put the story down a long time ago and built a new one. This one. If you made it to the end, thank you. Genuinely. You didn't have to stay. And you did. And that means something to me. If this story moved you in any way, I'd really love for you to leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you thought. Tell me what part stayed with you. And if you're new here, welcome to Quiet Drama Stories. This is what we do here. Real emotion, real consequences, real endings that don't always wrap up perfectly but always tell the truth. Hit subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I'll see you then.